Hopkins File 7. Presented by the Johns Hopkins University and the ABC television network from Westinghouse Station WJZ-TV in Baltimore. Here at the famed Johns Hopkins University, we have one file in a long row of files, which in sequence is number 7. This special file contains provocative information about the experiments and ideas which underlie the purpose of our American colleges and universities. Each week we find in this file a story which illustrates how today's scholars contribute to our daily lives and help shape the course of our future, underscoring the fact that all human advancement begins with education.
This week we present The World of Emily Dickinson with our guest, Dr. Charles R. Anderson, Professor of American Literature at the Johns Hopkins University. And here from Johns Hopkins is your host, Lynn Poole.
I'd like to select one word from our title today, and that word is world. What does the word mean to you? Your world? Our world? The earth on which we live? Or the town in which you live? Or the work that you do? The word world means something different to all of us. But there's a world in here. This was the world of Emily Dickinson. This book is one of the masterpieces of American literature. It's filled with hundreds of exciting poems. Now, these poems add to our personal enrichment and our pleasure. In the end, they give meaning to our lives. They gave meaning to the life of Emily Dickinson, her world in which she lived. So today we choose this book as the theme for our program and select from it some poems by an American poet who has been the focal point of studies of Professor Charles R. Anderson, and which form a book on Emily Dickinson, which he will publish in the near future. Now, Dr. Anderson's story begins
about 70 years ago in the remote New England village of Amherst. A little lady died at the age of 56, unknown to the world and undreamed of as one of America's great poets. During her lifetime, she had published only 7 poems. Even her family was completely unprepared for the surprise discovery at her death. Hidden away in her bureau, they found manuscripts of nearly 2,000 poems. This woman was Emily Dickinson, whom we should honor by her surname alone, just Dickinson, as we do Shakespeare, Keats, Browning, to mention only her favorite poets. Dickinson spent her entire life from 1830 to 1886 in Amherst, living in a small-scale mansion situated in spacious grounds on the edge of the village. Amherst was a typical New England town of that period, with its village green, its elm trees, its white horses, its funeral parlor, newspaper, livery stable, and stores. In Dickinson's own day, Main Street just beyond the town square looked like this: snow, mud, or dust, depending on the season, but bordered by evergreens and gleaming white picket fences. This road, leading past the church to her family home, was traveled by prominent citizens as they came to visit her father. Today, Amherst is still a quiet village, but the memory of Dickinson remains very much alive there, with a large collection of her poems and letters preserved in the local college library. A century ago, her father was a leading citizen of Amherst, prosperous lawyer and a pillar of the church. She had a mother, a sister, and a brother, and of them all, she said, "They speak of God out loud and embarrass my dog." Of her parents, "Father steps like Cromwell when he fetches the kindling," and "My mother does not care for thought." Of herself, I am small, like the wren, and my hair is bold, like the chestnut burr. My eyes are like the sherry that the guest leaves in the glass. Hers was an educated household. There was a good family library, and their friends included distinguished men and women from the larger outside world. She had about as much formal schooling as the average young lady of that day, and for the first 25 years, her life was that of a normal American girl, filled with school, friends, church, and parties, plenty of them, for her house was the center of Amherst hospitality. She took a few trips beyond this little village world, one of them an extended social tour as far away as Washington, D.C. She had her attachments with young men, too, but they remained platonic, never ripening into love. Then something happened. She apparently did fall in love with a minister, already happily married, a man who never knew of her adoration. The facts are obscure. All we know is that at about the age of 28, she underwent an emotional crisis and turned to poetry. The poems came in a flood, nearly 1,000 of them, between 1860 and 65. She never married. Like most maiden ladies in New England of that day, she chiefly stayed at home. Gradually, her seclusion became more extreme. First to this garden, then within the confines of this house, then into this room. Here she turned away from the life around her and into herself. She conquered the world by renouncing it and created her own world in her poetry. Dickinson wrote her poems in this very room, poems about the ecstasy and despair of love, the knowledge of death, and the hope of immortality. These and the more popular poems on nature will be the basis of her lasting fame.
But Dickinson was also a satirist. From her window in Amherst, she found amusement in the passing show and recorded some of its follies and pretensions in sparkling light verse. Now, this verse has been largely neglected because of her grander poems on love and death, and partially because the biographically minded have assumed that she knew little of the life that went on around her. Yet, from her vantage point of withdrawal, it was possible for her to see more sharply than those who were involved in the conventions of the day. When her satires on contemporary America are read as a group, they offer an unexpected variety of comment on that world and form an entertaining part of her letter to posterity. A good example is her comparison of the human race to a menagerie.
You must be referring to that sharp epigram, "The show is not the show, but they that go. Menagerie to me, my neighbor be. Fair play, both went to sea." This was written after reading a newspaper account of the social season at Newport. High society, however brilliant, could never lure a poet who wrote, "The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door." Her letters, however, are seasoned with salty commentary on neighbors and village types, as well as occasional sallies into current events, revealing a native satirical bent that gave direction to a score of her verses. One of these is about the railway train, a dramatic example of 19th century inventive genius. In this, she found a theme for satire. Railroads were one of Squire Dickinson's enthusiasms, and he was a leading spirit in founding the Amherst-Belchertown line in 1850. On the day of its inauguration, there was a train of only 3 cars drawn by a comical little engine, which made the 19-mile run, the railroad's entire length, in 55 minutes. Always amused by her pompous father, Dickinson commented, "Father was as usual chief marshal of the day, and went marching about with the townspeople at his heels like some old Roman general on a triumph day." Instead of participating in the gala occasion itself, she staged a private celebration and recorded it in a sparkling piece of wit. I like to hear it lap the miles and lick the valleys up, and stop to feed itself at tanks, and then prodigious step around a pile of mountains, and supercilious peer in shanties by the sides of roads, and then a quarry pair to fit its ribs, and crawl between, complaining all the while in horrid hooting stanza, then chase itself downhill and neigh like Bonerges. Then, punctual as a star, stop, docile and omnipotent, at its own stable door. The comedy is achieved by drawing on every known grammatical device for speed. Let's look at the poem in some detail. There is only one predication, completed in the first 5 monosyllables, I like to hear it, and all the rest is a series of infinitives which activate the unnamed object. Lap, lick, stop, step, peer, pair, crawl, chase, neigh, stop, all alliterating humorously except the last pair. But even there, the final stop goes back to the first stanza to complete the circle. There is a cumulative effect of speed with the 7 ands and 4 thens, and many of the lines run on into the next one, which interlaces the first 12 lines in one breathless chase. It rushes madly over the miles, across the valleys, around mountains, and downhill to home. Not a depot, but a stable. The terminal facilities of the new road, incidentally, had been domesticated for her by being built on the Dickinson meadow. To her, the locomotive is a fabulous horse, and the epithet iron horse is given a new humorous twist by the simile that brings the wild ride to an end. To her father, railroads symbolize the beginning of a new era, but in her poem there is no suggestion of the standard 19th century praise of material progress. There are no passengers or freight on her train, and no meaningful route. It simply roars around its circuit and then comes docilely home. This is her ironic tribute to modern science, which invents machines of monstrous power yet firmly controlled, here serving no purpose but her own amusement. We may have a bigger stake in economic prosperity than she, but we can certainly recognize in this poem her keen talent as a satirist of materialism. The capitalists who sponsored such projects as the railroad provoked her satire too. When the financial panic of 1873 gripped the country, her response was as humorously detached as Thoreau's running commentary on bank failures. It was the trivialities of all enterprise here below, when compared with the sovereign business of the soul, that prompted her early travesty on brokers and bankers. 'Tis sweet to know that stocks will stand when we with daisies lie, that commerce will continue and trades as briskly fly. It makes the parting tranquil and keeps the soul serene, that gentlemen so sprightly conduct the pleasing scene. It's the flippant reversal of values that makes these lines sparkle. The soul will find peace in heaven only by knowing that prosperity still smiles on the earth below. Thus the permanent is reassured by the transient. Dickinson knew the value of business and bonds, but she could not help laughing at the superficiality of the materialist engrossed in the things of this world. Amused as she was with the menfolk, she could also turn to the artificial lives of the genteel females around her, and here her satiric vision came into focus sharply. Nowhere is this more devastatingly shown than in this poem, where she says, "What soft-cherubic creatures these gentlewomen are! One would as soon assault a plush or violate a star. Such dimity convictions, a horror so refined of freckled human nature, of deity ashamed, it's such a common glory, a fisherman's degree, Redemption, brittle lady, be so ashamed of thee. On the surface, she is praising her ladies in the conventional vocabulary of gentility, but almost every phrase is a pairing of opposites, and the overall structure is coiled like a snake with its tail in its mouth. Look at the poem. How soft they are. Yet nothing could dull the edge of a man's desire like encountering velvet upholstery instead of a woman's flesh. One cannot assault a plush. Such cold and remote females, as virginal as stars, need not fear they will ever attract a seducer. A more thorough study of this poem would reveal how sternly she takes them to task for failing in heavenly love as well as earthly love, ashamed of their freckled human nature, and also ashamed of the lowly humanity put on by God when he consorted with the fishermen of Galilee. The mannequin of Godey's Ladies' Book, soft in body but brittle in soul, was too artificial for life, either here or hereafter. Reducing her canvas from the universal to the local, Dickinson uses a very different technique as she caricatures that venerable institution, the village gossip. The leaves, like women, interchange sagacious confidence, somewhat of nods and somewhat portentous inference, the parties in both cases enjoining secrecy, inviolable compact to notoriety. Most of the fun here derives from the sonorous extravagance of her Latinities, sagacious, portentous, inviolable. These are made the attributes of mere tittle-tattle. What is imparted in confidence, she says, lays claim to wisdom. Inference then extends it to awful proportions, though this gossip is undoubtedly provincial and petty. The secrecy with which it is given is, of course, a sacred pledge that it will be broadcast in notoriety. By means of such inflated abstractions, the two simple stages of all gossip are rendered, have you heard? And don't tell. With the acid of a Hogarth, she etches the portrait of these two old chatterers with bobbing bonnets, compensating for their empty lives by knifing their neighbors. She could see them any day on the elm-bordered streets of Amherst. It happens the same way today in your town. Although severe with the self-righteous and the hypocritical, Dickinson could be sympathetic with an unpretentious reprobate like the town drunkard. The popular notion of the blue-nosed Puritan needs modification with her, for the Dickinsons were far from teetotalers. Her wisdom in such matters is revealed by a single line in one poem. A drunkard cannot meet a cork without a reverie. Deep understanding and compassion pervade her vignette on the local alcoholic. The ditch is dear to the drunken man, for is it not his bed, his advocate, his edifice? How safe his fallen head in her disheveled sanctity. Above him is the sky, oblivion bending over him, and honor leagues away. There is no condemnation here, merely an understanding pity, a pity that comes from the intimate human knowledge made possible by the village world, and not from scientific statistics. Few escaped her eagle eye, her keen mind, and her telling pen, not even the clergy of the day. Listen to this poem.
He fumbles at your soul. He stuns you by degrees, prepares your brittle nature for the ethereal blow, deals one imperial thunderbolt that scalps your naked soul.
She had little patience with the hellfire and brimstone of old-fashioned Calvinism. Instead, she expressed her preference for going to church at home, which furnished the theme for some gaily irreverent verses.
Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home. with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all alone.
Religion was a private matter for Dickinson, but an all-absorbing one. Some of her finest poems deal with immortality. But she had her say on death, too, and in light vein as well as serious. For example, the evasion of reality by the modern funeral parlor struck her as barbaric. Let me set the scene for one of her poems, beginning, "There's been a death in the opposite house." The doctor's departure has been a signal to release the village's pent-up curiosity, and neighbors who can claim the status of mourners rustle in and out. But the children across the way can only gaze in awe. And when the window of the sick room opens like a pod and someone flings a mattress out, they wonder if it died on that. The spectacle continues in her poem.
Stiffly in, as if the house were his, and then the milliner and the men of the appalling trade to take the measure of the house. There'll be that dark parade of tassels and of coaches soon. It's easy as a sign, the intuition of the news in just a country town.
What gives the cartoon effect to this picture is the grotesque figure of the undertaker and the unsentimental eyes of the little barbarians across the street through which the man of the appalling trade is seen.
Now, this portrait gallery of the village and national types comprises a wide range. There are the materialists and the morticians, genteel females and the gossips, urbane but shallow bankers, lost drunkards and outmoded evangelists. But lest we think that Dickinson felt lonely in her seclusion and missed the world from which she had withdrawn and took no part in it, let me ask Professor Anderson to give us an early broadside that she fired at the entire human race.
She might have been as savage as Swift if she had taken up the role of satirist seriously. "My friend attacks my friend," she wrote. "Oh, battle picturesque. Then I turned soldier too, and he turned satirist. How martial is this place. Had I a mighty gun, I think I'd shoot the human race and then to glory run." But man's inhumanity to man was not her business. Instead, she found a glory here on earth in composing those poems on timeless and universal themes that she posted to posterity with the salutation, "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me."
The only news I know is bulletins all day from immortality. The only shows I see, tomorrow and today, perchance eternity. The only one I meet is God, the only street existence. This traversed, if other news there be or admirable show, I'll tell it you.
Many people may be inclined to look upon her with pity. A spinster recluse, confined to narrow village limits, and forced to substitute the life of the imagination for that of the real world. But this is only the result of our brazen materialism and our urban arrogance today. We forget that these New England villages may have been closer to reality than we are. One town drunkard on the street, glimpsed from her sheltered mansion, but intimately known by her in his personal misfortunes and family misery, could have given her more understanding than all our fancy statistical knowledge gained from alcoholic institutional reports. One searing love attachment outside of convention, coming to her through the channel of village gossip, might have taught her more of the agony and ecstasy of passion than we can learn from all our Kinsey reports. And what do most of us know of death with our upholstered funeral parlors, compared to the supposedly sentimental Victorians who laid out the corpses of relatives with their own hands in their own parlors? Dickinson knew God's plenty. The career of an old maid such as hers may be unthinkable in our brave new world, where the old are active as the young, where the bachelor woman glories in her professional career, and where every woman's place is everywhere but in the home. But in Victorian New England, an old maid was never considered neurotic. She had a vital place in the community. Indeed, she was often the central figure in managing the home and keeping the circle of kin and friends going. She saw to the correspondence with cousins, made the wine jellies and gathered flowers for the neighbors, nursed the sick, kept the larder supplied and the wheels of hospitality turning, supervised the spring and fall cleaning, received callers in the parlor with tea or sherry, and as the favorite aunt, was confidant and ally of all the nieces and nephews. Dickinson's life was far from empty, far from dull. In her letters, as a matter of fact, she frequently complains how busy she is the livelong day. And certainly, she gives the lie to any mistaken picture of idle hands or lonely hours knitting in the corner. If she withdrew from the world, it was because another life was opening up to her that seemed more real and more important. In the strenuous, often aimless activity of our world, we tend to emphasize the external life over the interior life. But the multiplication of our contacts, the network of communications for the mass assault of words and pictures, the frantic travel from place to place at ever higher speeds, may be symptoms of a kind of inner desperation that reality is eluding us. Yet even today, when anyone takes stock of the real values of his life, what are they but the thoughts and feelings engendered within his consciousness by his external experience? Dickinson, in her wisdom, retreated into the world of her perceptions and created that extraordinary body of poetry which so fortunately has come down to us. No one who knows this poetry can think of her as an eccentric, except in the most favorable sense of that word. Eccentric meaning extraordinary and original.
From this unique woman, we can learn so much. It's contained here in her poems. Why don't you read them?
Next week, Johns Hopkins File 7 will present A Campus Christmas, featuring the Hopkins University Glee Club and a special Christmas message from Milton S. Eisenhower. Portions of this program were mechanically reproduced. Johns Hopkins File 7 originates in the studios of WJZ-TV in Baltimore, Maryland. This is the ABC Television Network.